Good evening, colleagues. Welcome to tonight's Cabinet meeting. We are now broadcast online. First item on tonight's agenda is apologies for absence, for which, fairly obviously, apologies from the leader, who is not present. I think.
Absolutely, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Ray Puddyford, also apologies from Councillor Susan O'Brien.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest in matters before this meeting? No. And can we approve the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting, which are attached pages 1 to 10? Is that agreed? Great. We need to confirm that the items of business marked Part 1 will be considered in public, and that the items of business marked Part 2, which are on the yellow sheets, will be covered in private. Which brings us on to the first formal item on the agenda, which is the Social Services, Housing and Public Health Policy Overview Committee review. I'll ask Councillor Cawthorne to introduce that before we hear from the Chairman of the POC. Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I formally move the report and recommendations and invite the Policy and Overview Committee Chairman to address Cabinet. Thank you.
Councillor Bridges, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Simmonds, and thank you, Cabinet, for considering our report this evening and inviting me to present the Policy Overview Committee's review into stroke prevention. The review into stroke is largely a preventable condition, yet remains one of the main causes of disability among residents over the age of 65. Hillingdon is home to thousands of residents who fit this age criteria, and it is important more than ever to help residents live long, healthy and happy lives. The Council should continue to find helpful interventions to improve stroke prevention, and this review was undertaken to allow us the opportunity to further examine how we can achieve the goal of reducing stroke among residents. The review used evidence from officers, the Director of Public Health, GPs, consultants, medical professionals and other external witnesses who specialise in stroke prevention. These witness sessions were vital in helping us shape our review, which focused on three main recommendations. Firstly, the development of a universal offer to prevent stroke, including physical activity and healthy eating. The development of a campaign on stroke risk and prevention, using a number of different methods to reach residents. And finally, the promotion and development of health checks to help identify residents who are at risk. Raising awareness of stroke and the causes of stroke through these recommendations is important to help residents understand that minor changes to their lifestyle can help make a huge difference in preventing the threat of stroke. By delivering these recommendations using a sensible approach within the current budgets, the committee believe it will allow us to improve awareness, and this will lead to improved stroke prevention throughout the borough. It is therefore these reasons that the committee would kindly request Cabinet to endorse the recommendations. And finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank residents and witnesses who contributed to our inquiry and made the review possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Bridges. It's a very comprehensive review. I'd like to invite Councillor Cawthorne to provide any feedback initially from Cabinet, but we certainly add, please do take our thanks to your colleagues on the committee who were involved in this piece of work.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. When we talk about the essential part that prevention must play in keeping health and social care sustainable in the years ahead, there are few better illustrations of this than with strokes. As has been said, at once they are both a significant contributor towards disability and ill health, especially among older people, but equally they are largely preventable, as has been said, which represents, I think, both a challenge and an opportunity for the wider health and social care economy in Hillingdon. I think the report is a timely one in really getting into the detail of some of the work which is already happening to promote and encourage the kind of activities, behaviours and lifestyle choices which can really make a difference, and coming forward with recommendations to help sharpen the focus of these efforts in yielding the outcomes that we all want to see. And they will be reported back as they develop, including the recommended campaign on stroke prevention, and I look forward to seeing that. There is also pleasing recognition, I think, of the standard of stroke services in hospital, as well as the challenges of safe discharges, with which we are only too familiar, and is already the focus of work with health partners. I welcome the recommendations, complementing as they do the work of the Better Care Fund, and it's consistent entirely with the overarching health and wellbeing strategy. And again, I would echo the Deputy Leader's comments. I would ask Councillor Bridges to take back his our thanks to the POC for a thoughtful and considered report, which I am sure will enhance and strengthen our approach to prevention in this critical area. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Cawthorne. The only addition I'd make to that is I think one of the key strengths of this report is that it focuses on what Hillingdon can do within our public health responsibilities, which transferred to the local authority relatively recently, as opposed to just generic ideas to help deal with stroke, and that's particularly a helpful insight and shows the strength of council leadership in that area. Can we agree those recommendations? Thank you very much. Item 2 is the heritage, or the second agenda item rather than the Cabinet Public Reports, is the Heritage Lottery Fund bid for Cranford Park. And Councillor Bianco, you're leading on this.
Thank you, Leader. Deputy Leader. Acting Leader. Anyway, thank you. Cranford Park's one of our prized possessions in the south of the borough, 144 acres of land in rough terms, and straddles the M4, roughly 5/6 of it being to the south and approximately 1/6 to the north of the M4. And it was, of course, the home many years ago to Cranford House. Cranford House itself was built in 17-somethings and was bizarrely knocked down in 1944. One would have thought perhaps at that time, when so many things were being knocked down involuntarily, that maybe they wouldn't have bothered, but they did knock it down, but bizarrely they didn't knock all of it down. The cellars remained. And the cellars have been there ever since, and it's probably fair to say not particularly well looked after, and they have deteriorated, but they are a very fine piece of architecture in their own right once you're in there, vaulted and so there is, and some of the stables remain. And so the purpose of this lottery bid is to put together this bid to bring about a refurbishment and renewal, a preservation of these remaining pieces of the house, so that they can be brought back into some sort of economic use, and so they're there for future generations. So the purpose of this agenda item is to approve. There are 3 recommendations on the top of page 36, basically to approve the submission of a round 1 bid, it's known as, and that's of course a good news story, in the sense that we are very hopeful that it will lead in due course to a successful lottery grant. The bad news, if you like, is that anything from the lottery fund is a very slow burn activity, and as you can see in the report here, it would seem likely that it'll be at least 2020 before we get to the point where we can actually start doing physical work. So it's a bit frustrating in that sense, but there is quite a lot of money involved and quite a lot of heritage here, and it therefore makes sense to make this proposal and to go forward in this manner. And so I'm going to stop there because I know my colleague Councillor Lewis wants to add a few bits, so I'll stop there and allow him to carry on. But anyway, I will move those recommendations.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Quite a lot of what I was going to say has been covered by Councillor Bianco, but I would say in these days, even the thought of knocking down a stately home would seem like sacrilege. But we must remember this occurred at a time when the world was at war and Britain was literally fighting to survive. We're left with being the guardians of 144 acres of country park and 9 crumbling Grade 2 listed buildings. And there are no cost implications in submitting this Heritage Lottery Fund bid. And we would only have to contribute £45,000 if we are successful in the development phase. The fund will hopefully take the stables and the vaulted brick cellars out of the at-risk register, improve the landscape, grounds, restore the riverbanks, and stop the meadow paths, the listed garden walls, the ha-ha, and the ice house from literally crumbling away. I can see only benefits from getting this funding, and with it we'll be able to eradicate, hopefully, the antisocial behaviour that has become such a common occurrence, improve both the community facilities and the natural environment, helping to increase biodiversity. It will become a far more enjoyable space for our residents to visit, including those new residents from the nearby Hayes housing zone, and allow the active friends group to put on much bigger events. One of the wonderful things about London, and makes it one of the best places in the world to live, are the wonderful parks and open spaces that we are so lucky to have. With this funding, we'll be able to restore Cranford Park back to some of its former glory and make it accessible for all to enjoy. So, Deputy Leader, it is without reservation that I'm delighted to support our bid for the Heritage Lottery funding. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillors Bianco and Lewis. Anybody who's not been, it's a very fine park. I'd certainly recommend it. One thing which perhaps you might consider, I think there's a historic statue known as the Grey Lady that was damaged in the most recent fire, and if there is scope for that to enjoy any restoration, that would be a positive thing, being one of the historic, slightly unusual assets of this particular attraction for our residents. Can we agree those recommendations? Next item is item marked number 7, Accessible Hillingdon Supplementary Planning Document Policy Framework, with appendices attached. Councillor Burrows.
Thanks, Deputy Leader. And as I take you through from page 1 to 115 of the appendix, no, I'm not going to really. This, as you will remember, came about from us in March as a Cabinet, approving the draft revised Accessible Hillingdon Supplementary Planning Document to go out for public consultation. The public consultation took place between April and May of this year, and this is the result. And taking on board all of the comments that have been made and been received, the officer has put together, that has worked on this, an excellent piece of work. This now is looking for us, as you can see from recommendations on page 52, to put this now, agree this, and put it before full council to adopt this as our approved way forward. It is a very good piece of work, and I believe that after the public consultation, the comments that were made and what we've taken on board, this is a sound part of our planning documents. And so with the recommendations 1 to 6, as you will see on recommendation 4, there is delegated authority still for myself, the Deputy Chief Executive, to make minor alterations before it actually comes before full council, but that's only textual, graphical changes. So, and also they approved the charge of £19 for the sale of printed copies of the adopted policy, which obviously we've got in there as well. So with those recommendations and the 2 that I've highlighted, obviously they're quite important there. I hope the Cabinet see fit to actually approve this evening so we can take it forward, and it will become part of our very substantial planning documents that Hillingdon have, to protect its residents, to give all residents access to all our areas, and this is one document that does that. So thank you.
Can we agree that item? Agreed. Thank you. Item 8 is Academy Conversion, West Drayton Primary School. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Well, this is the sort of report that's been before us a number of times. When a school chooses to become an academy, we are obliged to grant them a long lease of the land upon which the academy sits. However, what we have also been doing is granting them the appropriate amount of land. There is a calculation that can take place revolving around the number of pupils and such like, and not to grant them any surplus land. This gives us benefits in the future, should it be necessary. It may be that we need it for expansion in due course, and we want to have easy access to it if we need to. But equally, it may be that it provides us with opportunities to do something else. There's just one point I wanted to add, which is that we must be sure, and I'd ask officers to be absolutely clear, that we have open and unrestricted access to the retained land, what I would call the retained land, the land we're granting for less than 7 years. On that basis, I move the 2 recommendations on the top of page 62.
Thank you very much indeed. Just to flesh that out, Councillor Bianco and I were having the discussion earlier on. One of the key things when we consider the massive rise we've had in pupil numbers is to ensure that the Council's ability to leverage sites that we already have in order to provide additional capacity or to contribute to that programme is protected, and that's the reason for ensuring the unfettered access to the site which are somewhat secluded when we look at the map that's contained within the agenda. Can we agree that? And item 9, we have the monthly council budget monitoring report, and again I'll just draw all members' attention to the addendum sheet which has been circulated, which is a ratification of a decision already taken which has an impact on the budget, which I think all members of Cabinet will have seen. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Well, as you've just pointed out, there is an addendum to essentially recommendation 6, which is shown on the top of page 72, and would be added to the list already shown in Appendix H on page 100. Well, starting on page 113. Anyway, there are 6 recommendations shown on the bottom of page 71 and the top of page 72, and I will go through them in more detail than I usually do in the absence of the leader, who would normally do that himself. But of course, I'd start by saying that this is month 2. It's May, and it shows a net in-year underspend of 127,000, which at this stage in the game is a good result, and shows that the council is going in the right way. I think it's important to look at some of the issues that are significant, and one particular I'd like to draw people's attention to is that on page 73, paragraph 10, the 17-18 budget contains a requirement for savings of 15.5 million, and at month 2, basically 80% of those are either banked or definitely due for delivery. And I think to be at that point, at this point in the year, is a very good place to be. So I think congratulations to the officers and to the leader, who's worked hard on getting us to this point. But it sets us in a good place to ensure that we will complete this year again inside the budget, as we have done in many previous years. So I wanted to make that point. Capital, I will touch on also. And at month 2, again, we see a significant underspend of 10 million plus. But that's really largely due to slippage, and I'm sure that as time goes on, it will be eaten up as our programs develop. I think it's also important at this point to touch on the housing revenue account. There's been much said lately about the Grenfell Tower tragedy and how it may impact on other councils, and there's been a lot of talk, and certainly we have already taken steps that have been widely reported, and certainly the leader talked about at length at the last at the last council meeting, and we will undoubtedly be taking more steps. I think it's important to note page 80, paragraph 41. The projections currently do not include the cost of any further works that may come along, but you will see, looking through the budget in more detail, there is plenty of money available for any of the works we may need to take going forward. So I think that's an important point to make, and as soon as further works are agreed, then we have the ability to pay for them. Going through the recommendations then. Recommendation 1 is, as I've described, the monthly forecast. Recommendation 2 is the usual Treasury Management update on page 106. And if you turn to 106, you will see that, again, our current interest rate on deposits is a princely 0.48%. Our current rate of interest on debts is a rate of 3.37%, and that we have a good position going forward. We don't have any current opportunities to buy in debt, which we have been doing in the past, but we always keep an eye on that. So that's recommendation 2. Recommendation 3 deals with delegated authorities, and again on page 107, this is to do with agency assignments of over 50,000. You'll see, starting on page 107, a list of those contract workers we have appointed and the costs thereof. Recommendation 4 relates to a planning a performance agreement in respect of the former Dairy Crest site in Long Lane. And you'll see that there is a proposed grant isn't quite the right word, payment of £23,500, which we will use from the developer, which we will use to fund dedicated staff in that regard. Paragraph recommendation 5 approves the discretionary rate relief scheme. It's outlined in Appendix G, which is on page 110. It is worth noting that the government has given us a grant in this respect in the short term, and so this approval is for 1 year only, because next year the grant is, we already know that it will be significantly less, and we therefore will have to produce a different scheme, if that's the right term, to deal with that. So this is a 1 year grant, and then finally recommendation 6 is to ratify the decisions taken by the leader and the relevant cabinet members, including the addendum sheet 1 we have just mentioned, that have taken place since the last meeting, and they are all set out in Appendix H, which starts on page 113. With those points being made, I move the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Mills.
Thank you. Just picking up in terms of recommendation 6 and the decisions made in Appendix H, I would just draw everyone's attention to the one on page 113 about the decision to cast our vote as a local authority for the 7 properties that we owned within the catchment area that contributed towards a very successful outcome and the establishment of the first business improvement district in the borough in Uxbridge town centre, which is now being formalised, goes through a process of ratification with Secretary of States, and then the money is collected, and then they are up and running and making decisions to benefit the town centre. So that is, I think, quite a defining moment in the development of Uxbridge history.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Mills. Just brief summary, I think Councillor Bianco has drawn attention to the additional item, the purchase of replica aircraft, which I think is always one of the things that the armchair auditors can get very excited about. I think it is worth saying that the Battle of Britain Bunker Visitors Centre, which is something which will draw in visitors from a much wider catchment area than Hillingdon Borough. We already know in its previous incarnation was quite a popular attraction, brought people to the local area, contributed to the economy, is an important investment programme for the council. And I hope that what we'd see is that ability to invest in a way that brings people to the area and contributes to our economy for the longer term future is something worth doing. Thank you, Councillor Bianco, for drawing attention to the point around the housing revenue account. I think the technicalities of local government finance are not necessarily front and centre in some of the media consideration about the knock-on consequences of the disaster at Grenfell Tower. I think it's important to be very, very clear with our residents for whom the housing revenue account is an important part of resourcing the repair works and other works that are done to their homes, that any decisions that are made about those works will be done on the basis of there being a good, solid, sound financial base from which to do that. That we're not in a situation as a council where we are scratching around to save a few pennies. I think that's really important. And finally, I'd just like to echo and to reiterate the thanks to the Chief Executive and to the team for continuing to deliver sound financial management for this council on our behalf. Can we agree that? Agree. Thank you. Right, that concludes the public part of the meeting. I think we should probably all say goodbye to the leader, who I'm told is watching us online. So